This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could live better than I ever did. I paid his school fees, bought his first car, and helped him build his business. I thought when I got old, he would help me rest with peace and respect. But one morning, while drinking coffee, he looked at me and said, "You're too old to work, Mom. Just stop." His words felt like a door closing on everything I built. I didn't argue. I smiled instead. And you won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. He said it on a Sunday morning. The sun was shining through the kitchen window, the smell of toast and coffee filling the air. I was sitting at the table reading the newspaper when he walked in and said it so casually that it took a few seconds for the words to sink in. "You're too old to work, Mom. Just stop." He didn't look up from his plate. He said it like he was talking about the weather. To him, it was a small comment. To me, it was a sentence that changed everything. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him and tried to see the boy I had raised, the boy who once brought me flowers from the garden, the one who used to say I was his hero. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a man who believed my time had passed. I smiled, but inside something shifted. He thought he was helping me. He thought he was being kind. But kindness doesn't sound like dismissal. It sounds like understanding, and he had none left. He talked while eating, listing reasons why I should quit. "You've done enough," he said. "You should relax. I'll handle things now." The words sounded nice, but his tone wasn't care. It was control. I listened quietly. Every sentence felt like another reminder that in his eyes, I was no longer useful. He didn't see my years of work as strength. He saw them as weakness. I had worked since I was 16. Factories, hospitals, schools, anywhere that would give me hours. I saved every bit I could. I built a home. I raised him alone after his father left. I skipped meals so he could eat, took extra shifts so he could study. Every dream he chased stood on my back, but he had forgotten that. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. When he told me to stop working, I understood something. He didn't want to help me. He wanted to control what was left of my independence. It wasn't about my age. It was about power. He thought because I was older, I would surrender it easily. That morning, I watched him talk and felt my heart harden in a way it never had before. I stirred my coffee and nodded like I agreed. But in that quiet nod, a plan began. I decided I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would stop working. But I would also stop letting him use what I earned. He would learn what real work felt like. He finished his breakfast and kissed my head like nothing had happened. He didn't notice that my eyes followed him differently. I saw him for who he had become, a man who thought age made me weak. He didn't know that age only made me careful. The rest of the day went by normally. He talked about his weekend, about bills, about business. He mentioned how hard things were and how lucky he was to have me helping with our finances. I smiled again. I said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." And I meant it, just not the way he expected. When he left the table, I stayed seated. I stared at my hands. They were older, thinner, lined with years of work. But they still worked. They still knew how to write checks, how to sign papers, how to move money. I realized then that I wasn't powerless. I was prepared. I didn't need to argue with him. I didn't need to raise my voice. All I needed was patience and a plan. I decided that morning I would make one final transaction, one that would remind him where everything he had came from. He had said I was too old to work. Maybe I was. But I wasn't too old to think, to plan, or to act. I smiled as I washed the dishes. Every plate, every cup, every small sound felt like a goodbye to the old version of me, the mother who gave endlessly without limits. By the time the sun set that evening, I already knew what my next steps would be. He just didn't know it yet. Every part of his life had my name written on it. The house we lived in was bought with my savings. The deed had my signature first, then his. The car he drove was under my insurance. The health plan, the electric bills, even the credit cards, all came from my accounts. For years, I told myself it was what a mother should do. You help your child until he can stand on his own. I just never thought he'd forget who built the ground he stood on. When he started his first business, I was proud. I loaned him everything I had in my emergency fund. He said it would pay off. It didn't. The business failed within 6 months. He promised he'd pay me back once things stabilized. They never did. I covered his rent, his bills, his car payment, everything. He said it was temporary. 2 years later, I was still signing checks. Then he started again. Another idea, another promise, another just one more loan. I didn't hesitate. That's what love does. It believes. I told myself he just needed time. I told myself I was helping him chase his dream. But his dream was built on my exhaustion. Every failure meant less in my savings, more in his comfort. I never saw any profit, only excuses. He lived well while I worked harder. When I came home tired, he'd say, "You worry too much, Mom. You've got me." He said it like comfort, but it was control. He wanted me to believe I still needed him, even though I was the one keeping us both afloat. He managed his image well, the responsible son, always helping his mother. But help doesn't drain your account. Help doesn't take without asking. I noticed the pattern but didn't admit it. He always came to me with big plans, convincing words, and sad eyes. He said it was for the family. He said one day we'd both relax. That day never came. Every time I looked at my account, the numbers were smaller. Every time I looked at him, the gratitude was gone. When he started calling it our money, I should have seen it coming. He stopped saying thank you. He stopped asking. He'd just take. He had access to the joint account. At first it made sense. Easier to handle bills, he said. But convenience became dependency, and dependency turned into habit. He stopped working full days. He slept in. He bought things he didn't need. He called it living a little. I called it using me. I was still paying the mortgage. I was still buying groceries. I was still working full-time while he made excuses about the economy, the market, and bad luck. I told myself he'd grow out of it. I told myself he'd change. He didn't. He became comfortable being taken care of, and the more I gave, the less he respected it. I noticed that too. Gratitude turns into entitlement quietly. It doesn't shout. It just stops saying, please. He stopped calling me Mom when he wanted something. He called me by my first name like a client. The day I realized the truth, I was sitting at the kitchen table balancing the bills. My paycheck was already divided before I even cashed it. Mortgage, insurance, groceries, his credit card. It hit me then. I wasn't helping him survive. I was helping him avoid growing up. 50 years of work had turned into 50 ways to make someone else's life easier. I had been paying for everything while he learned nothing. I didn't see it before because I didn't want to. A parent's love can blind them to the way they're being used. But that Sunday morning, after he told me I was too old to work, something in me woke up. I finally understood that all those years of sacrifice didn't teach him value. They taught him expectation. He thought my hard work would never end, that my money would always refill itself, that I existed to fund his comfort. But he was wrong. I had one last check left to cash, and this time I wasn't spending it on him. It happened 3 weeks after that breakfast. I came home from the grocery store and couldn't find my car keys. I looked in my purse, on the counter, even under the couch. Then I saw him standing by the window, jingling them in his hand like he'd won something. He said, "You shouldn't drive anymore, Mom." "It's not safe," I froze. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I was 70, not helpless. I'd driven the same car for 10 years without a single accident, but he didn't ask. He just decided. He dropped the keys into his pocket and smiled. "I'll handle your errands from now on," he said. "You've done enough." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. I just nodded. Inside, I felt something break. Losing the keys didn't just mean losing the car, it meant losing my freedom. My car was the one thing that made me feel independent. My way to work, to the bank, to see friends. He had taken it in one quiet sentence. That same week, he told me he'd start helping with my pension. He said managing it would make things easier for both of us. He asked for my login details, and before I could think, I gave them. That was the moment I handed over more than a password. I handed over control. From then on, he decided what bills to pay, what expenses to cut, and how much I could spend. Every month, I had to ask for my own money. He called it organization. I called it theft, polite theft, wrapped in concern. I watched him act like he was protecting me, but I saw the truth. He was building a world where I depended on him for everything. He wanted me small, quiet, manageable. I noticed the changes in small ways first. He started checking my mail before I did. He began answering phone calls for me. He even called my manager once to tell her I was thinking of retiring soon. I never said that. He decided for me. I had worked 50 years for that job, and suddenly he was taking it from me without asking. One afternoon, I asked him why he was doing all this. He smiled like I'd asked a silly question. "Because I care about you, Mom," he said. "You've done enough. Let me take over." But caring isn't control. Love doesn't come with locks and passwords. It comes with trust and freedom. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I'd learned by then that silence is more powerful than words. Arguing would only make him feel right. So I watched, waited, and planned. When he left for work, I checked the bank account. My name was still there, second now, not first. He had changed the order. It looked small, but it meant something. I wasn't the owner anymore. I was the accessory. My pension payments were going into the joint account automatically. I saw how fast the withdrawals happened. Online shopping, restaurant bills, transfers labeled business expenses. He wasn't taking care of me. He was spending my retirement before I even got to live it. That night, I lay awake thinking about how easily it happened. One simple moment, a son taking his mother's keys, and everything started changing. He had taken my independence one piece at a time, not violently, quietly, step by step. And I let him because I thought he still saw me as his mother. He didn't. He saw me as an opportunity. I told myself to be patient. Let him feel comfortable. Let him think he's in control. Because if there's one thing life teaches you after 70 years, it's that timing is everything. I smiled the next morning when he left for work. I waved from the porch, watched him drive away in my car, and whispered under my breath, "Enjoy it while it lasts." I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. He thought I was too old to work, too old to drive, too old to handle my own life. But he forgot one thing. Age doesn't make you weak. It makes you patient. And patience always outsmarts greed. The day I decided to retire didn't feel special. It was a Tuesday, quiet and ordinary. I woke up early like I always did, made my coffee, ironed my uniform, and packed my lunch. It felt like any other morning, except this time I knew it would be my last. My son thought he had convinced me to quit. In his mind, he'd won. But he didn't know this wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I wasn't walking away from work. I was walking toward freedom. When I arrived at the office, my coworkers were kind. They hugged me, told me I'd be missed. My manager's eyes watered when she handed me the envelope with my final paycheck. I thanked her and smiled. Everyone thought I was sad to leave, but I wasn't. I had done my part. 50 years of service, 50 years of showing up, 50 years of doing what needed to be done. That check wasn't just payment. It was closure. I sat in my car during lunch and looked at the envelope. 4 digits. That was all. 50 years of labor turned into one piece of paper. I thought about every night I came home exhausted. Every weekend I worked overtime so my son could go out with friends. Every doctor's visit I skipped because I didn't want to miss a shift. All of it had led here, to one final check. After work, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I went to the bank. I walked up to the teller, smiled, and handed over the envelope. I told her I wanted to cash it all, every cent. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She counted the money twice, slid it across the counter, and asked if I wanted to deposit it into my joint account. I told her no, not this time. I told her I wanted to open a new account, one under my maiden name. She looked surprised but didn't question it. I filled out the forms carefully. Each signature felt powerful. For the first time in years, I was doing something completely for myself. I watched as she entered the information into the system and handed me a new debit card. A small piece of plastic, but it felt like a weapon against control, against dependency, against my son's arrogance. When I left the bank, I sat in my car for a few minutes. I stared at my hands resting on the steering wheel. These were the same hands that raised him, fed him, cleaned after him, paid for his education, and carried every burden. And now, they were finally doing something for me. I went home later than usual. He was in the living room, watching TV. He didn't even ask how my day went. He just said, "You should have retired years ago." I smiled. I didn't tell him I already had. I didn't tell him I had opened a new account. I didn't tell him that everything was about to change. I simply nodded and said, "You're right." That night, while he slept, I went through my drawer and gathered every financial document I could find: checkbooks, insurance forms, tax receipts. I read each one carefully. Every line with his name beside mine made me realize how much control he had taken. But not anymore. I placed everything neatly in a folder. This was no longer shared. It was evidence of what was mine. I slept better that night than I had in years. Not because I was free yet, but because I knew the plan had begun. Retiring wasn't giving up. It was cutting off the source he depended on. He didn't know that I had already started the process of changing the accounts. He didn't know that soon, when he'd try to withdraw my money, the balance would show zero. The next morning, I went to work one last time to clear my desk. My manager hugged me again, told me to rest and enjoy my time. I promised I would. As I walked out of the building, I felt light. Not because I was done working, but because I was finally finished being used. He thought my last day of work meant the end of my purpose. He was wrong. It was the beginning of his lesson. The next morning, I went straight back to the bank. I didn't wait. I walked in calmly, the same as I always did, but this time I knew exactly what I was there to do. I had checked every detail the night before, every account, every link, every shared card. My son's name sat beside mine on every one of them. It wasn't family sharing anymore. It was access I never gave permission for. He had turned trust into control, and I was about to take it back. The teller recognized me from the day before. She smiled and asked if I needed help. I said yes, but this time my voice was stronger. I handed her my ID and said I wanted to transfer the funds from all shared accounts into my new one. She hesitated for a second. "Are you sure?" she asked again. I said, "Completely." There was no shaking in my voice. She nodded, typed quickly, and began the process. I watched the screen carefully as each account number appeared, one by one. Joint savings, gone. Household expenses, gone. Retirement fund, gone. Every dollar I'd ever worked for was finally back under my control. No sneaking, no revenge, just simple, legal action. It was mine, and I was claiming it quietly. The process took nearly an hour. When she handed me the receipt, I felt lighter than I had in years. I folded it carefully and put it in my purse. My signature on that transfer wasn't just ink, it was independence. I sat in the parking lot for a long time after that. I thought about all the times I had worried about him, his rent, his bills, his meals. I remembered wiring him money late at night when he said he was struggling. I remembered paying for his car repairs and pretending not to notice when he never paid me back. All those years of giving without asking, all those small sacrifices that he treated like obligations, that was over now. Freedom fits perfectly inside a PIN code. No argument, no explanation, just a number that only I knew. For once, the balance belonged to me alone. It was a quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. When I drove home, I half expected to feel guilt, but there was none, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally see things clearly. My son had called it our money for so long that I almost believed it. But our was a lie. It was always mine, my work, my savings, my sacrifices. He only used the word our when it benefited him. When I got home, he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up. "Did you get everything done?" he asked. I said yes. He smiled, thinking nothing had changed. He had no idea that everything had. That night I sat at the kitchen table and went through every bill. I closed the automatic payments he had set up. I called the insurance company and removed his name. I updated passwords, changed contact details, and set up alerts for every transaction. By the time I finished, there was no trace of his access left. The house was still the same, but the balance of power wasn't. I didn't tell him anything. There was no need. Some lessons don't need to be spoken, they just need to be felt. I went to bed that night with a quiet smile. He had taken my keys, my car, and tried to take my dignity. But money, the one thing he thought he owned, was gone from his reach. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sun rise. For the first time in years, I felt safe knowing my future was mine again. No arguments, no shouting, no explanations. Just a few signatures and the courage to act. He had told me I was too old to work. Maybe he was right, but I wasn't too old to think. And he was about to learn that the woman he thought he controlled still had one last move left, and she had just played it perfectly. The next week unfolded like a test of patience. I didn't say a word about what I had done. I woke up every morning, made breakfast, and went about my day as if nothing had changed. He didn't notice at first. That's the thing about people who take advantage. They don't notice balance until it's gone. The first day was quiet. On the second, he went shopping. On the third, the storm began. It started with a small thing. He came home angry, saying his card had been declined at a restaurant. He blamed the machine, not the balance. I nodded and kept washing dishes. The next morning, he checked his phone, frowning. "Mom, did you move some money around?" he asked. I didn't look up. I said, "No, dear, maybe check with the bank." He shrugged, pretending it was nothing. By day 4, it wasn't nothing anymore. The first call from the bank came that afternoon. He answered it in the hallway. I heard his voice rise, confused and defensive. "What do you mean closed? What do you mean transfer?" I stayed in the living room, calm, silent, folding laundry like it was any other day. He hung up and came to me, face red, voice sharp. "What happened to the joint account?" he asked. I said, "I took my share." He blinked. "Your share?" "That was our money." I looked at him for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "It was mine." "You just spent it." His mouth opened, but no words came out. He stood there, frozen, trying to understand how his world had changed overnight. For the first time, I saw fear in his face. Not anger, not pride, but real fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes they've lost control. By day 5, the calls started coming faster. Bank, credit card company, landlord. I didn't ask questions. I just listened from the other room while he scrambled. Every lie, every excuse he'd ever used was catching up to him. He tried to call me again from work, pretending to be calm. I let the phone ring. Once, twice, 10 times, then 27. I didn't answer a single one. The sound of that phone ringing became my peace. Each ring was a reminder that I had finally taken my life back. I sat by the window with my tea, listening. Every call was desperation. Every unanswered ring was freedom. I didn't block his number. I wanted him to hear the silence. He stopped by 2 days later, full of apologies, full of excuses. He said it was a misunderstanding, that the bank made a mistake. I didn't argue. I just looked at him. He tried to smile. He said, "Mom, you can't just take everything like that. I have bills, rent, payments." I nodded and said softly, "So did I." He walked around the house, restless, looking for something to hold on to. I stayed seated, calm. He didn't realize that for years I had watched him do the same thing. Take and take while I said nothing. Now he was finally seeing what it felt like to lose something he thought was guaranteed. That night, he called again. This time, I didn't even look at the phone. I turned off the light, lay down, and smiled in the dark. The silence that followed was heavy, final, and peaceful. For 27 calls, he tried to reach me. 27 times I let him feel the distance he had built himself. By the end of that week, he stopped calling. The noise faded. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. It felt like mine. He had learned the lesson I never needed to speak. You can't drain someone forever and expect them to stay. The account may have been empty for him, but for me it was full. Full of calm, full of control, full of something money can't buy. For years, he made me believe I owed him my earnings. That week, I made him understand who was really paying the price. He came back the next week unannounced. I saw his car pull into the driveway from the window. He didn't park carefully like he used to. He slammed the door shut and marched straight toward the house. His face was tight, his eyes restless. I didn't panic. I made tea instead. I had been waiting for this. I knew he wouldn't stay silent for long. When someone loses control, they always come back for one last try. He didn't knock. He walked straight in, holding papers in his hand. Bank statements, receipts. His voice was already high when he said, "You ruined everything." I stayed seated at the table. My teacup was warm in my hand. I looked up at him and said calmly, "Sit down." He didn't. He paced. His steps were loud, heavy, angry. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I took back what's mine." He stopped moving for a second. His face softened, but only for a moment. Then the anger returned. He slammed the papers on the table. "You can't do that. You can't just take it all." His words came fast, desperate. That was our account. Our money. I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. Then I said it slowly, so he would hear every word. "You said I was too old to work, so I stopped. You said you'd handle things, so I let you. You wanted control. Now you have it, just not the kind you wanted." He stared at me, confused. I poured him tea. He didn't take it. He said, "You've left me with nothing." I said, "Welcome to my world." For a long time, we said nothing. He looked around the house like he didn't recognize it anymore. Maybe he didn't. Maybe for the first time he was seeing it as it truly was. Built by me, paid by me, maintained by me. His home existed because I never stopped working. Now that I had stopped, he was seeing how fragile his comfort really was. I told him I had copies of every transfer, every document. Everything was legal. I handed him the folder with the receipts. He looked at it but didn't take it. His pride wouldn't let him. He said, "You think you've won?" I said, "No. I think I finally stopped losing." His shoulders dropped a little then. The fight in him was fading, replaced by something quieter. Realization. He wasn't used to me being calm. He was used to me giving in, explaining, softening my words to protect his feelings. Not this time. I sat straight, steady, and waited. He picked up the papers and flipped through them. "You really did this," he said under his breath. I nodded. Every dollar, every cent, every late-night shift that kept this house standing. He leaned on the counter, eyes low. "I just wanted to help," he muttered. I almost laughed. Help had nothing to do with it. Help doesn't come with control. Help doesn't take, it gives. He was quiet after that. The anger was gone. What replaced it was something different, guilt mixed with shock. I stood up and walked to the sink. "You told me I was too old to work," I said. "Turns out I was just old enough to retire. From you." He didn't look up. He just stood there, holding the papers like they were something heavy. The kettle whistled again, breaking the silence. I turned it off and refilled my cup. He finally spoke, softer this time. "You really don't trust me anymore, do you?" I looked at him and said, "Trust isn't something you manage like an account. You earn it. You lost it." He left a few minutes later, no shouting this time, no threats, just silence. He walked to the door slowly, stopped once, and looked back. I thought he was going to apologize. He didn't. He just said, "I'll figure it out." I said, "I know you will. You're young. You'll manage." The door closed quietly behind him. I stood there for a moment, staring at the papers he'd left behind. Then I folded them neatly and placed them in a drawer. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. It was over. The son who took everything had finally learned that taking isn't the same as earning. The day after his visit, I called my lawyer. I had known him for years, and when he heard my voice, he asked if everything was all right. I said yes, but I needed to make some changes. We met that afternoon. I brought all my papers, bank records, insurance files, property documents. He looked through them quietly, then looked up and said, "You want to separate everything, don't you?" I nodded. He didn't need more explanation. He'd seen this story before. A parent who gave too much and finally wanted peace. We spent hours going through every account. He drafted the paperwork for financial separation, meaning my son's name would be removed from anything tied to mine. Every card, every bill, every account, every loan. It took time, but I didn't mind. I had already waited too long to take this step. When he handed me the final set of forms to sign, I felt a strange calm. Every signature felt like a small piece of my freedom being returned. I wasn't angry, I was done. My lawyer filed everything the same week. It became official within days. Legally, my son and I were no longer financially connected. His debts were his loans were his overdrafts were his. I had carried him for too long, and the law had finally placed the weight back where it belonged. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like fairness. A few days later, he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, nervous, different. "Mom, they said my credit file changed. I can't access the joint insurance. What's happening?" I didn't answer. He needed to figure it out himself. He had built a life depending on money he didn't earn, and now he'd have to face what real responsibility looked like. He came over again that weekend. This time, he didn't yell. He stood at the door, quiet, holding his phone. "They're saying I owe money," he said. "Bills I didn't even know about." I looked at him and said, "Then now you know." He blinked, confused. "You did this?" I nodded. "I just made sure we both live off what we actually earn." He didn't respond. He didn't know how. He sat down at the table, looked around the house, and I could see it sink in. Everything he had taken for granted, the roof, the food, the safety, had been built on someone else's effort. Now, that support was gone. The silence between us was long but not uncomfortable for me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pressure to fix his problems. I didn't feel guilt. He finally spoke, softer this time. "So that's it?" I nodded again. "That's it." He stared at his hands. "And if I can't pay everything," I said, "then you'll learn to." He left without another word. I didn't stop him. Watching him walk away, I didn't feel joy or sadness, just relief. He was an adult now, one who would finally have to face the world without leaning on me. The law had given me what love could not: distance. Over the next few weeks, letters started arriving in his name. Bills, statements, loan notices. I put them aside for him to collect. I didn't open a single one. I was done carrying what wasn't mine. He tried to call a few more times, but I stopped answering. It wasn't punishment. It was protection, for me and for him. For years, I had been the wall between him and consequences. Now that wall was gone. He would either learn or collapse, but it wasn't my job to hold him up anymore. The law doesn't punish age. It protects it, when used correctly. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in years. No phone calls, no demands, no guilt. Just silence. A calm, clean silence that felt like starting over. I wasn't rich, but I was free. And freedom, after a lifetime of giving, was worth more than any check I'd ever cashed. After the paperwork was done, everything went quiet. The phone stopped ringing. The mailbox stopped filling with his problems. The house finally sounded like a home again. I didn't realize how much noise his dependency had brought until it disappeared. The quiet wasn't empty. It was clean. I woke up each morning and heard only the small sounds that belonged to me. The kettle boiling, the creak of the floor, the soft hum of the radio. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call, ask, or demand. The first week of silence felt strange. I kept glancing at my phone out of habit. It stayed still on the counter. No missed calls, no messages, no apologies. He had gone quiet, probably too busy trying to fix the mess he created. I didn't chase him. Parents spend most of their lives worrying, but there comes a point when worrying turns into weakness. I had done enough. He was an adult. Let him stand or fall on his own. I spent my mornings at the kitchen table, reading the paper and drinking coffee slowly, without interruptions. I started taking walks by the coast in the afternoons. The air there was crisp and open. I could hear the waves and my own thoughts. I found peace in small things, hanging clothes under the sun, watering the plants, watching the sky change color in the evening. Every quiet moment felt earned. Every breath felt like recovery. He didn't visit. Not that week, not the next. A month passed before I heard anything about him. A mutual friend mentioned he had taken on 2 jobs, struggling to keep up with bills. I didn't smile or gloat. I just nodded. Life was teaching him lessons I couldn't. Experience is a harder teacher, but it's the only one that sticks. At night, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I used to lie awake wondering how to help him. Now I wondered how I ever survived so long without peace. The house had its stillness back. I could cook dinner and eat without noise or tension. No arguments about money, no guilt, no unspoken resentment, just quiet. I started organizing my life again, properly this time, for myself. I paid off small debts, updated my will, set up automatic transfers to a savings account with my name only. The control I had lost one piece at a time came back piece by piece. It didn't feel like power, it felt like safety. Sometimes guilt tried to creep in. A mother's instinct never dies completely. I'd think about how he must feel. Angry, embarrassed, maybe even betrayed. But then I'd remember how many times I had felt those same things because of him. Guilt fades quickly when you remember how long you were taken for granted. A few months later, I moved into a small cottage near the coast. Nothing fancy, just peaceful. The kind of place that holds quiet the way others hold noise. The neighbors were kind. They asked where my family was. I said they were grown and busy, and that was enough. I didn't owe anyone my story. Some stories are meant to be lived, not retold. One evening, as I watched the sunset, my phone buzzed once. It was his number. I stared at it for a long time before letting it ring out. I didn't need to answer. The silence between us had already spoken louder than words ever could. After 27 calls and a lifetime of giving, I had finally learned that peace begins when you stop picking up. That night I slept with the windows open. The sea breeze filled the room. I dreamed of nothing. No worries, no regrets, no weight. Just calm. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own breathing, steady and unbothered. The quiet didn't hurt. It healed. He told me I was too old to work. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't too old to learn. I learned that silence is stronger than anger. I learned that peace is more satisfying than revenge. And I learned that sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of what they take is to let them live without it. For years I gave him everything, my time, my money, my patience. He thought that made him powerful. But real power isn't in taking, it's in walking away. Now he works 2 jobs. He pays for his own bills, his own car, his own mistakes. I don't ask how he's doing. I don't need to. I already know. The same way I once stayed up counting my bills, he now stays up counting his. The difference is I don't lose sleep anymore. I rest easy knowing that the lessons I paid for are finally being repaid, not in money, but in understanding. Sometimes people think revenge means shouting, arguing, or punishing, but real revenge is quiet. It's letting someone face the silence they built for themselves. It's not cruel. It's fair. He took my work, my trust, and my patience for granted. Now he wakes up every day and works for himself. The same work he said I was too old to do. Life has a way of balancing things without needing help. I didn't need to ruin his life. I just stepped out of it. That's the difference between bitterness and closure. Bitterness wants the other person to hurt. Closure just wants peace. I chose peace. It took me years to realize that love without respect turns into obligation, and obligation turns into resentment. I had been living under both for too long. Now I live under sunlight and quiet mornings. I still keep the withdrawal slips in a folder in my desk. Not as proof, not out of spite, just as a reminder. A reminder that the moment you decide to take control of your own life, no one can take it from you again. Those small pieces of paper represent every sleepless night, every shift I worked, every sacrifice that was ignored. And when I look at them, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel relief. Sometimes I think about calling him, but then I stop myself. There's nothing left to say. He made his choices and I made mine. My choice gave me peace. His choices gave him bills. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. Parents protect their children for as long as they can. But there comes a time when protecting them means letting them face the world as it is. When I sit by the window now, the house is silent, not empty, not lonely, peaceful. The air smells like freedom, the kind that comes when you finally understand that love doesn't mean giving until you disappear. Love can also mean saying, no more. I said it once, quietly, firmly, finally, and it changed everything. He hasn't called in months. I don't wait for it anymore. If he does, I'll answer. Not with anger, Not with blame, just with calm. Because I don't need to win. I already did. He told me I was too old to work. But what he didn't realize is that I wasn't too old to start over. I was just old enough to stop being used. And when that phone rang 27 times, I didn't hear desperation. I heard freedom. Each ring was a door closing on the version of me that stayed silent too long. Each unanswered call was a reminder that respect cannot be begged, it must be earned. I never shouted, I never cursed, I never explained. I simply stood up, walked away, and left him to hear the echo of his own words. Revenge isn't loud, it's quiet, it's calm. It's a mother sitting in peace while the phone rings 27 times, and she doesn't answer.